Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Brother Ron, for leading us in that prayer. It's my privilege to introduce our speaker, Brother Jacob Evans. Jacob was born and raised in Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, and he attended the Pulaski Street congregation where he was taught to love the Lord and serve the Lord. Jacob is a three-time graduate of Freed-Hardeman University. He earned a bachelor's degree with a double major in Bible and English in 2002, a Master of Ministry degree in 2007, and a Master of Divinity degree in 2013. In 2006, Jacob was instrumental in planning a congregation at Greenback, Tennessee. He served as the preacher of that congregation until March 2015. From 2013 to 15, he served as Dean of Academics here at Southeast and also an instructor. And I'll take a little credit for that since I hired him at that time to do that. And what a wonderful job he did. In April 2015, however, he kind of interrupted my plans a little bit that I had for him and for the school when he decided to return to his home congregation to be the preaching minister, the Pulaski Street Church of Christ in Lawrenceburg. And of course, I told him I understood and all that, but honestly, I didn't. But really, his parents are there, and they fall in that category of some of us, you know, where we have some health challenges and so forth. And so he's where he needs to be. And just think of what an honor it is that he was invited to return to his home congregation. Jacob is married to Brittany Ringgold of Chattanooga, Tennessee, and they have 3 children. I guess my first acquaintance with Jacob was when I had him as a student at Freed-Hardeman. I don't even remember what class it was or classes. I know he was in my John class and maybe some others. I just can't recall. Maybe seminar, were you in seminar? And that's when I debated the students, and I'm sure I defeated him as I usually did. But no, just kidding. He probably did, just defeated me. But here's something that you don't know that I do want to share with you on a very serious note. The theme of this lectureship is a call for clarity in a chaotic world. Jacob Evans probably is one of the best people at titles, themes, titles for lessons. I don't know how many times he's helped me when I've put together some thoughts, a sermon or whatever, and I said, Jacob, you know, the titles are just not cooking. I need your help. And bam, I mean, like 10 minutes later, it's done. That's just a gift, I think. You know, it's just a gift. And so Jacob is the one who's responsible for the theme of this lectureship. And I think they were doing something along this line in another venue, and I heard about it, and I said, wow, that's what we need to do at Southeast. And so just remember the very words on the front of the book from Jacob Evans. Many of these titles in the book are from Jacob Evans, an incredibly talented guy, a very dear friend of mine. I love him, I love his family, I love his parents, and he's a great servant of God, and you'll be a better person if you ever get to know Jacob Evans. Jacob, come preach.
Well, that was surprisingly heartwarming. It was good. I love Dr. Lipe, I always have. When all the other students were running away from his classes, I was running into them. So, and I was telling some folks before that this is probably the earliest I've ever spoken because I'm a Middle Tennessee guy. So, I mean, right now I would be shoving the last kid in the minivan to get him to school. after fighting them for 25 minutes out the door, you know. My wife's, my wife's doing that this morning. She's not working today, so they're probably in a car somewhere between the house and Lawrenceburg Public School. But I do. I love this school. I love the people that have been historically associated with this school. I remember when I was asked to teach some classes. I don't know if you've had this experience before, but it's one thing to teach a class in a local congregation setting, and it's another thing to teach it in this kind of setting where you got to have tests and you got to grade papers, and you got to have a lecture ready to go 2-3 times a week. And so it was a challenge, but a lot of the material I developed during that time, I still use that from time to time. But I'm honored to be here, and one of the things you maybe some of you that are observant noticed, you're like, wait a second, in the book it said that Mark Hanstein was going to be doing this lecture, and that's true. But 2 weeks ago, I got a call from Will, and Will's like, my dad's not going to be able to go. He had the quadruple bypass. We need to continue to think about Mark and pray for Mark as he recovers. And so I was given about 2 weeks notice to deal with this, right? Following Christ in a cancel culture. And I told him I would, so let's do it. Over the past at least 2-3 years especially, one of the words that's been kind of ubiquitous, prevalent all over the place is the word unprecedented. If I hear that word unprecedented again, I can't believe I just said it. But if I hear it again, I don't know if I can live beyond it. I heard that word so much. But another word that was quite prevalent, especially during the pandemic and all that, was canceled. And some of that was because everything you can imagine was canceled, right? I just made a list. Birthday parties, canceled. Summer camps, canceled. Weddings, movie premieres, concerts, sporting events, all of these things were canceled. And but that word canceled has carried another connotation in our social lexicon of late. Beyond just canceling movies and shows or events, our society has been canceling people. This is, I guess, indicative of a rather common headline over the last 2 years. So fill in the blank, name of celebrity or leader or someone was fired from, and then you got name of the business or the organization there. Yesterday, after the internet mob expressed outrage over a tweet that said, and then they always put a quote from the reprehensible tweet, And sometimes what was written, the quote comes from something that could have been from years ago, perhaps, that gets uncovered, and they call it out. And then after they call it out, they decide it's time to crucify this person on the internet, if we possibly can, and we'll ruin them. You can probably think of various victims over the last several years of cancel culture, right? And probably beyond people and events, other things have been getting canceled too. Brand names, movies, books, statues, monuments. There's been a lot of this going on in various venues. I want to give you a definition. Let's get a little working definition here of cancel culture. This definition is not original with me. It's comes from Wes McAdams. He's the preacher for the Church of Christ on McDermott Road down in Plano, Texas. And here's how he defines cancel culture: attempting to permanently and publicly discredit someone for words or actions that violate core values of the culture or the community that is, I guess, under consideration. Let's break it down a little bit permanently. Once you're canceled, it's over. There's no, if they can help it, there's no coming back, right? It's over. In fact, there's the sentiment's been captured in a hashtag over. You're done. And the interesting thing is that for all the talk of perhaps tolerance and equality, I think most of us have figured out cancel culture can be quite intolerant and quite, inequitable. Publicly, this is not about curating your news feed. You've done this. Maybe you're going through and there's an ad, or maybe someone is posting things you don't agree with or you don't like, so you either hit the snooze button or you hit the hide button, or you may decide to unfriend them. But we're talking when we're talking about cancel culture, we're talking about publicly discrediting someone, usually through an internet pile-on that relentlessly pursues the individual's professional and personal demise. The aim of cancel culture is publicly executing a person's persona without any hope, if they can help it, for resurrection or redemption. And then this last point, violate core values. I don't know if you've thought about this, but cancel culture is sort of an extreme modern day version of shaming people. All right, so I want you to imagine you got a community of people. They have a set of shared values or some shared ethics, okay? And then you got some members of that community that are not living by those values or living by those ethics. And so what would the community do? Call them out and say what? You're not behaving like you should be behaving. You're not conducting yourself in a way that you should be conducting yourself. And if some of you are like, wait a second, there's some of that going on in the Bible, right? There's some discipline and things of this nature that, and by the way, if you get into some pretty in-depth biblical studies, you get into this area of discussion about honor and shame, the honor and shame culture that's quite prevalent in Greco-Roman society and in Jewish groups and things, okay? But cancel culture has taken this to an extreme. There's no room for disagreement. There's no room for discussion. This is about permanent ostracism. And what complicates all of this is, if you think about it, in our society, we have different communities, right? If you're a part of let's just broaden this, if you're a part of the Christian community, are our ethics and our values going to be the same as the culture at large? No. I mean, one area where we are quite distinct is in the realm of sexual ethics. And you're like, man, I wonder, where's a lot of the cancel culture directed towards? It's towards people who aren't upholding what society considers to be normative for sexuality. So I want to share this with you too. There's and I think this is kind of interesting because sometimes, you could go and find an article written by a member of the Lord's church or you go to find a lectureship like this one that's discussing this. But sometimes I like to try to get an idea on what the social commentators in our society, there may be secular, but I'd like to get a feel for what do they think about this phenomenon of cancel culture, whether it's good for society or whether it's bad for society. And you'll find there's a debate here. So on one hand, you have those that believe that this whole sort of cancel culture phenomenon is a societal obligation. In other words, if people aren't upholding what we think they should be upholding, we want to be able to hold them accountable despite whatever clout they might have, despite whatever fame they might have, despite how much money they may have. And this is a way for us to, put people in their place who could perhaps otherwise escape those kinds of condemnations or call-outs. And when you hear it like that, you're like, well, okay, we do have perhaps not so much connected to cancel culture per se, but just to give you an example, how many of you remember the Harvey Weinstein story? Right, where it comes out that this real powerful guy in Hollywood and whatnot has been doing some reprehensible things. And the internet mob was able to really do what? Peel back the curtain and shine the light in there and hold him accountable. And it's like, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But then you got the other side of this. And this is those that view the cancel culture as a societal obliterator. There's a guy named Jonathan Haidt. His last name's spelled Haidt. He's wrote The Righteous Mind, and he co-authored a book entitled The Coddling of the American Mind. And he has been an outspoken critic of cancel culture from its inception. In fact, in a 2018 interview, he said, part of a call-out culture, and that's his word for cancel culture, is you get credit based on what someone else said if you call it out. How many of you have heard this phrase or term in the past few years? Virtue signaling. Maybe you've heard that in one context or another. Well, what Haidt is highlighting is what has been referred to as virtue signaling, which is a means of proving to society or posturing before society about how good or moral your views are. And Haidt says, here's the thing. He goes, cancel culture has reached a level of personal vindictiveness where people go out of their way to find ways that the things other people say can be construed as insensitive. Now think about that. It's like, all right, somebody posts something, somebody says something, or maybe you go back years and looking at what they've posted publicly or whatever, and you're just like, now how can I view this in a way or see this in a way that I can spin it as, insensitive or homophobic or perhaps racist or something like that, and then I can call them out, and then I'll get some big pats on the back from, the internet mob, and then we can, whatever happens to him is whatever happens to him, but at least I'll be basking in the glory of it all. And Haidt says that is not good for society. And he says it's gonna, open dialogue is gonna become less and less, virtually, it's gonna become virtually non-existent is what's gonna happen. And he says it's about obliterating all dissent from popular opinion, whatever the subject under consideration may be. And, and as I think we've already alluded to, popular opinion is often antithetical to Christian ethics. This is also something you'll see, at least in the literature, the problems with it, those who have critiqued it, whether we're talking secular or Christian. Here's some of the adjectives that's used to describe cancel culture. It's unfair, it's unkind, it's unforgiving. So often the punishment this like banishment, maybe even separation from your career or your job, that the punishment doesn't quite fit the crime in many cases. And by the way, take the time to read Mark Hanstein's work in the Lectureship book on this. He adds a few other observations as well beyond just these. But here's what I want to do with the time we've got left. I want to quickly deal with something that I think is worth talking about before we get practical, okay? Looking at how you and I should respond to cancel culture, what it looks like to be Christ-like in a society where these kinds of things are happening. And I want you to look at all these adjectives around the word cancel culture. And you might notice that a few of these, which I kind of mentioned in passing, could be, kind of have religious undertones, like excommunication, shunning, things of this nature. There have been some, that have been, let's say, favorable to what cancel culture's doing for their various reasons. But then they point the finger, let's say, at Christians, the church, and say, you guys are doing the same thing we do when you discipline people. You guys are no different from us. We're canceling people, but you guys have been canceling people for a lot longer than we've been canceling people. And I think it'd be really good for us to step back and pump the brakes and say, wait a second, is that true? Biblically speaking, if we do this as we should biblically, is it the same as what we see going on in our society at large in terms of cancel culture? I'm going to say it's not. I want to give you just three things to consider here. The first thing is this. For some reason, there we go. Church discipline applies to Christians, not non-Christians. We need to remember this, because sometimes perhaps we forget it. 1 Corinthians 5:1, we have a Christian man who is committing gross sexual immorality. I mean, it's so bad in Paul's mind. He even says, the pagans out here, they wouldn't even tolerate what you guys are tolerating in this church. They wouldn't even tolerate it. Now, who are they dealing with here? They're dealing with a Christian man, okay, who has his father's wife. Seems to be maybe stepmother, okay? But one of the things that's interesting is later on in 1 Corinthians 5, Paul makes it, I think, rather clear that we have nothing to do with judging or disciplining outsiders. I mean, honestly, what sense does that make? Hey, world, we're going to have to discipline you now for being the world. What sense does that make? I mean, what are they going to say? That's right, I'm the world. I don't share your ethics. I don't share your values. I don't agree with you about the existence of God or the inspiration of the Bible or the fact that Jesus was more than a man. I'm not on the same foundation with you. Why are you upset with me, right? And I think what's interesting here is that cancel culture, they don't care if you've been transferred from the kingdom of darkness into the what? The kingdom of his beloved Son. They will seek to cancel you all the same. They will conveniently perhaps overlook that, we are the church of Jesus Christ, and we don't share your values, and we don't share your ethics. That's why we say what we say and stand where we stand. As Christians, it's not our responsibility. Paul in 1 Corinthians 5 says, hey, when I told you not to associate with the sexual immoral, I was talking about a brother who is sexually immoral, who perhaps remains defiant or is not willing to come to his senses and repent. He says, I was not saying that, you can't associate with the people of this world who are sexually immoral, because he goes, if that's the case, if we're going to go there, all of us would have to pile into a rocket ship and find another inhabitable planet somewhere. Right? He goes, I have no business judging outsiders. I have no business disciplining outsiders. God will take care of them. We got to think about disciplining insiders, those who share our values and share our ethics, but who are not living up to those things. Another thing I think is worth pointing out is that church discipline anticipates private appeals before public censure, right? Matthew 18 is a case in point. If a brother has sinned against you, what do? You get an airplane and you get a banner on it and you fly it over the city so everybody can, you can air the dirty laundry. Let's publicize. Let's have you go to that person, you have a one-to-one conversation in hopes that this individual will acknowledge what they've done. If that doesn't work, you get somebody else. And if that doesn't work, you go a little bit more public. You get with the elders of the church to try to come to, to reconcile this. And then if that doesn't work, according to Jesus, things can get public at that point. And Titus 3, it says, as for a person who stirs up division, after warning him once and then twice, have nothing more to do with him, knowing that such a person is, according to Paul, warped and sinful. He is self-condemned. But here's the thing about counsel culture. It immediately jumps to publicly shaming people without ever taking the time to maybe reason or to debate or to dialogue about the words or the action in question. It's just an immediate public censure. One other thing, and this might be the most important to think about, church discipline aims for restoration and not ruin. 1 Corinthians 5:5, you are to deliver this man to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord. That's in hopes that, hey, can we do something here that is going to get him to see what he's missing, what he's doing wrong, to feel the gravity of what he's doing, so that we can get him back as a brother, or we can get her back as a sister. 2 Thessalonians 3:14 and 15, as for you, brothers, do not grow weary in doing good. If anyone does not obey what we say in this letter, take note of that person and have nothing to do with him, that he may be ashamed. Do not regard him as an enemy, but warn him as a brother. So Christians got to ask yourselves, am I just trying to ruin this person? Or am I really aimed at restoring this person? Cancel culture isn't looking for restoration. It is only looking for ruin. It goes beyond condemning offensive words, condemning behavior, or choosing not to support a person. It frequently extends, get this, it frequently extends to demanding that people be fired from their job, disassociating them from their peers, banishing them from public view, and on occasion, opening the offender up to stalking or physical violence by distributing private information. Think about that. Oh, you want to know where Joe Schmo lives? Here's the address. Go show him what you think about him. How many of you would be terrified? That'd be a bit uncomfortable. Here is where we'll get practical. And some of what I'm going to say is going to challenge us not to be like them. And some of this is going to be, okay, here's what's going to be expected of you, right? In dealing with a society where these things are happening. All right, here's the first thing I'd like to say. Be wise with your words. We live in a world in which more of our words are published and more of our actions are caught on camera than ever before. We simply must be wise about how we conduct ourselves in this kind of world. Let me give you some advice. I mean, this I think is good advice. Don't ever start a post on Facebook or some other social media platform. Don't ever start it with these words. If you don't like what I'm about to say, just go ahead and unfriend me. I promise you, Christians, whatever you write after a statement like that is probably going to be tactless. It's probably going to be rude. It's probably going to be offensive. It's probably going to be caustic. And that is not the way of Christ. I mean, Colossians 4, 5 through 6 still says what it says. Walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time. And then Paul gets really practical about what walking wisely before outsiders, what that looks like. He says, let your speech, let your words always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. Now, we can disagree with others, but we can disagree without canceling others and the way that folks get canceled in our culture. We can disagree with kindness and gentleness and respect and patience. And I'd also say this, for those of you who are parents, I would say that it is incumbent upon us as parents to warn our children of the dangers of careless words, especially when those words end up written online or recorded in a video. Future opportunities may be lost by something that our children say as teenagers. And we may not like that. We may hate that. We may think that's not right. But while we might believe this is something that shouldn't happen, we must live wisely in a world where it does happen. I'm thankful, I don't know about you, but I'm thankful I did not have social media when I was a teenager. Because we did dumb stuff back then, right? We said dumb stuff, and I'm like, what if that had been like engraved in a social media post? What would have happened? We got to think about this maybe more than we do. Here's a second thing: beware of malice. This is where my toes, all of our toes, get crushed a little bit. Malice describes how we behave when we take pleasure in someone else's demise. 1 Peter 3:1, we read, so put away all malice and all deceit and hypocrisy and envy, I like this last one, and all slander. Now, so much of cancel culture isn't altruistic. It's malicious. And if we aren't careful, we can fall prey to malice ourselves. None of us is above or beyond or perhaps immune to celebrating the downfall of someone we don't like or someone with whom we vehemently disagree. And sometimes Christians get in the middle of their own internet pile-ons towards others. It is hard. It is very hard to be malicious towards someone for whom Jesus said, you should pray. Pray for your enemies. Cancel culture often, at least I think for us Christians, it has tempted one too many of us to fight fire with fire. But my Bible still says, you are not, I repeat, you are not to overcome evil with evil. You overcome it with good. Here's the third point. Believe in redemption. Cancel culture, this is interesting. Cancel culture places people into one of two camps. One camp is flawless saints. The other camp, irredeemable sinners. So the point is this, that as long as you toe the party line on the issues we want you to toe the party line on, we don't care what else you might do. As long as you're towing it on these big issues that are public and quite, polarizing, you are a saint. You're great. But if you dissent in what we think, if you don't toe the party line in terms of sexual ethics and other things like that, as we would want you to, then we're over you. You are irredeemable. We will cut you off, and that will be that. I don't think I have to tell you this, but those of us who are Christians shouldn't be in the business of viewing others as lost causes. I mean, we serve a God who loves to redeem people. And, you got to love the story of Paul, right? I think God really likes taking people who everybody else would say, there's no way you can ever redeem that guy. I mean, Paul, he, as far as Christians were concerned, he was Hitler. I mean, that's how they viewed him. They were terrified of him. He was zealous. He was committed. He would go to whatever length he had to imprison you or whatever. But isn't it awesome that the gospel is so powerful that somebody like that can go from being Saul of Tarsus to Paul the Apostle? And in 1 Timothy 1:12 through 17, Paul viewed himself as the chief of sinners. Now we can argue about whether or not Paul was the chief of sinners. We could argue that. But that's how he perceived of himself. I'm the foremost of sinners. And the point that Paul wants to make, something that certainly God wants us to understand and appreciate, is that if God can redeem and save the worst of sinners, then he can redeem or save any one of us. We are not in the business of being over people. We are in the business of recovering people. Every time there is a Christian outcry against this person or this company, we need to be done with so-and-so. I wonder, are we helping move that person or those people associated with that company closer to Jesus, or are we pushing them further away? Here's another point, one final point. Bear up under unjust treatment. Christians have already been the victims of cancel culture publicly and in smaller, contexts. This shouldn't surprise us because, again, as I've mentioned, we don't share the values of secular culture. We are quite different on points. So we ought not be surprised that our culture isn't fond of Christians. And I think most of you, if you were here for Gilmore's lesson, I think you know that our culture is becoming increasingly secular in its outlook and its mindset. And I understand and I sympathize and I get it. We get frustrated and we get scared because, again, there was a time when it did seem like the culture at large seemed to reflect Christian values. And when they're not reflecting those like we should, it frustrates us, it hurts us. And again, it scares us because we're like, what are they going to do to us? What if they get real angry and they start putting us in prison and stuff, and we get real worried about this. And I get that and I sympathize that, but our mission, right? Our mission isn't to force people to adopt our values. It's not to force them to adopt our ethics. And as such, we can expect some ostracism. And we can expect some ridicule from the cancel culture. But hey, Christians have a long history of enduring things like that. Why? Because their Savior endured things like that. And they're going to be like him, no matter what. I want to close with this story. It's John 9, 1 through 41. Some of you know this story pretty well. I love this story. It's a man born blind. I can't imagine what that would be like. And one day he receives his sight. He doesn't know who did it. We'll say this, he didn't know what the man looked like. He was blind after all, and gets mud put on his eyes and has to make his way over to the pool of Siloam to wash it off. And then he's seeing, and the Pharisees, who had their own sort of stringent community, and they had their shared values and their shared ethics. And one of the things that they all agreed on is that Jesus is bad. I mean, there were some that didn't think that. Nicodemus is a case in point. We don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but on the whole, the Pharisees envied Jesus, they hated Jesus, and they wanted to kill Jesus. Okay? And they're hearing about this man who was blind, who can now see, and they want to interrogate him. And he gives them just the story of what happened. And they don't like it because, that speaks favorably of Jesus. So let's talk to his parents. Let's just make sure the guy was really blind. And they confirm, that was our son and he was blind. Well, then how is it he now sees? And John puts in a little aside. It's in parentheses, right? You know what he puts in parentheses? That if anyone confessed the Christ, they would be what? Put out of the synagogue. They would undergo a little first century cancellation. And let me just tell you, that was a big deal getting put out of the synagogue. Otherwise, it wouldn't really serve as much of a threat, right? It was a big deal. It would affect you socially. It would affect you religiously. It could affect you financially. So you know what they did? They said, you know what? Our son's old enough. Go talk to him. Right? Why did they do that? They didn't want to get canceled. They didn't want to get excommunicated. So they go to the man born blind. What does he do? You got to love the man born blind. He sticks with Jesus. He does. What happens to him? Text is a little vague, but it sounds like he got excommunicated. I think he did. I think he got canceled. And he walks away from that. He does. He walks away from it. And what's so awesome is that Jesus, I think, heard about this. And he finds the man. And he talks to him. And he says, hey, I'm the guy that healed you. And what did the man do? He fell down right where he was and he worshiped Jesus. Well, what does that story tell us about today? We got so many Christians that are worried about being canceled by the culture in some way. They're worried about being at odds with the culture, what the culture may say, what the culture may do to them. They're so worried about being canceled by the culture that they're willing to, become relevant by, reinterpreting the Bible and all of these kinds of things so that they can somehow sidestep the ostracism and the ridicule and the maligning. But as Christians, our greatest concern should never be, ever be, whether or not we're going to get canceled by the culture. Our greatest concern should always be whether or not we're going to get canceled by the Christ. Thank you.